Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the final briefing on the big picture track titled Hacking the Corporate Mind Using Social Engineering Tactics to Improve Organizational Security Acceptance. It's being presented by James Philpott.
Hey everybody, thanks for the introduction and welcome to the talk. I want to state in advance that there are a few things in here that may cause some of you to feel that I am absolutely full of crap. This talk contains some things that are my opinion, and I am happy to defend my opinion if it needs defending. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns during the course of the talk, please feel free to let me know. I am happy to answer questions as we go along. If you'd rather ask them after, I'm happy to answer them after as well. All right, so let's get started. First, the background on me. Why should you care what I have to say? I've been in the security industry for about 10 years. I started off as a freelance consultant doing networks and systems, that kind of thing. I added security to it and then went on and started working with the SANS Institute as one of their systems and security people, and then an author and an instructor. Since then, I have worked with various government organizations on a local and federal level, DoD contractors, telecommunications companies, and healthcare organizations. And in every single one of those, there were unique challenges that had to be overcome with getting the users to pay attention to what I and my team had to say. And as time has gone on, I've seen a lot of venom in the security industry talking about how the users need to listen and we need to force them to do what we say they need to do. And there are merits to that, but it doesn't tend to get us the respect and the ears that we really need. So that's why I put together this talk. And I've divided it into roughly 4 sections. Section 1 is defining the problem, where we're going to go through several slides that talk about what I see as the major problems within the industry and the major problems presenting a positive interaction between the user community and the security team. And by users, I mean everybody in the organization, from your systems and database people to the accountants and salespeople. And I've had these troubles too. I'll be illustrating some of my points with personal experiences as we go along. The second step will be defining the rules of engagement, talking about exactly what I want to do during the social engineering attack that I'm going to describe in order to begin to gain that user acceptance that most of us are looking for. And then the third stage is the attack, where I'm going to describe the steps that I tend to take when I go after different user groups to try to get them on my side. And then at the end, we're going to talk about some lessons learned. We're going to talk about some communications techniques for different management groups. We're going to talk about some ongoing tools that you can use, ongoing techniques, in order to maintain the momentum that you start with the attack. All right. So InfoSec is struggling. There was an article a few years ago that basically equated it to a frog in boiling water, where if you put a frog in boiling water, it'll struggle and jump out, but if you slowly heat the water up and it starts to boil, the frog will sit there and die. And at first that article really kind of annoyed me because I didn't see that as the point. I didn't see it as an ongoing problem. But at least from my perspective and that person's perspective, the industry is struggling. We fight with the users to get them to do what we know is the right thing. We fight with our management about budgets, about getting the cash that we need in order to do the job we need to do. And in some cases, even if we have budget, we can't get them to spend it because what we want to spend it on doesn't meet their idea of what's needed for the organization. And of course, we struggle with the bad guys, the attackers, be it your random script kiddies or your more targeted attacks from corporate rivals, state-sponsored people, that kind of thing. And because of this struggle, all of our organizations are leaking. Every single one of them. We're leaking our financial data. We're leaking our trade secrets. Embarrassing memos get shared by secretaries. I was at one organization where there was a management memo that went out talking about salaries and bonuses for senior executives, and this was supposed to be just for the senior executives. And somehow it wound up taped to the door of every bathroom in the building. So we have to have some of these controls in place, but there's resistance to actually implementing them. And all of this comes down to one thing. It seems like we're losing the battle. And part of the reason we're losing the battle is because we're not effectively communicating what we need to the user base in order to get them to support us. Because we can't do it without them. Which brings me to the Rodney King slide, or can't we all just get along? We've got to cooperate with the user base. We have to. InfoSec and the users need to work together, or nothing is going to get done. You can make all the policies that you want. You can make all the statements that you want about how this is the right way to do it. This is what we need to do. This is what will be done. This is how it will be done. But unless you have the backing of your users, it's never going to happen. Which brings me to one of the controversial slides in this, which describes what I consider to be the biggest problem and the biggest obstacle towards getting user acceptance for information security. Us. I've been there too. I have sat in meetings and said, when somebody has said, we need to allow Facebook, we need to allow webmail, and just sat there, hell no, it's not going to happen. No. And what I found every time I just put my foot down and said, no, this isn't going to happen, was that someone in senior management came back and said, yes, it is. And all of a sudden it became wide open. And it was because I wasn't communicating properly what the dangers were, what the potential damages were that could bring about chaos within the organization. We stand there quoting Ghostbusters, going, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria, if we let Facebook on the network. There are dangers in allowing Facebook on the network, but in a lot of companies, it can be a risk mitigation. You can say, all right, it's a risk, but productivity from the user base, happiness of the user base is more important than being absolutely strict on this. And that's something that we need to start being a bit more flexible about. When I started coming up with the idea for this paper, it was over the last several months, there have been articles written just about everywhere by information security people, by tech journalists, by people on mailing lists, and they seem to have two distinct themes. Within the information security world, the theme that I hear very commonly is forget what the users have to say. Ignore them. Just lock it down. Lock it down. Don't allow them to do it. Say no. Force it down their throats. Block it at the firewall. Block it at any device you can. Prevent. Don't allow them to do this. And then there are the articles that I've seen from the user perspective. And one of the biggest ones I saw was 8 to 10 months ago in Ars Technica. It was top 10 things that the users want from IT. And I started reading it in kind of a jaded fashion, looking at it as, oh yeah, more user whining, who cares? And I started seeing real complaints. And so I started digging around in other similar articles, and I started seeing these same quotes that I've got on the screen over and over again. Enough times that I can't really attribute them. I'd love to attribute my quotes. But there's so many different people coming out and saying security needs to get out of the way. Just let me work. The geeks are mean. IT is unapproachable. This has led to a situation where it really is us versus them. And it's not working. One of the things that we need to remember, and I've had to talk with my teams at a couple of different places, is that users are people too. I mean, I used to pronounce user with a leading L, just like many of you do. And it colored my view. When you start looking at them as a mass of people trying to break your network, trying to destroy your security, it changes how you look at it. It becomes much more adversarial when it should be much more cooperative. We got to remember that as annoying as it is, not knowing IT isn't a crime. And some of these people get just as annoyed with us when we don't understand the intricacies of accounting or marketing or whatever your business is. Some of them get just as annoyed that we haven't bothered to take the time to learn what they do as we do when they haven't bothered to take the time to learn what we do. We have to remember that some of these people are actually experts at what they do. And because of that expertise, they are a little bit myopic. I mean, just as we can be. I mean, I've done the same thing. I've caught myself ranting about users, and once I started changing the mindset from calling them losers to calling them users, or to calling them by their departments, or to eventually calling them by name, the relationship began to get better. This is one of the hardest things, and one of the things that is probably going to lose me some people from the audience, is that sometimes business need has to trump security. There are some cases where that's the case. I've had plenty of talks with management where they've done a risk analysis and they've looked at it and said, okay, we're going to get a $100,000 fine if we don't implement this technology that's going to cost us $200,000 to implement. Now, that's not to say there aren't arguments you can use to combat that. I've had some success with the get it in writing argument, where if something is a real serious item that, yeah, the dollar cost might work out so that it's a little bit cheaper not to be compliant. Writing down something and sending it to an executive saying, hey, I just wanted to confirm what we were talking about earlier today when you said we are going to ignore this particular regulatory requirement that we're supposed to have because it will cost less in the long run. You have to be a little bit careful with the phrasing. Phrasing it like I just did can get some people on edge, but phrasing it for your organization is the key to that. If you phrase it in such a way that you've listed what they're trying to do, and then put in at the end, hey, because of this regulation, because of this regulation, because of this exploit, because of this problem, I don't think we should do it. But if you want to continue on the risk analysis route, that is your decision. I have made my input. I've had on 2 different occasions a response to that email change from it's a business need, we have to do it this way, to oh, no, that wasn't what I meant. What I meant was we have to find a little bit more cost-effective way to fix that. And all of a sudden there was budget and there was support and there was actual drive from the management to get that done, because they could see that this wasn't just a buck pass memo. This was a statement that we could do what they wanted to do, but that it was entirely their decision, and the department that was the most qualified to make the decision had already said, no, this is a bad idea. Don't do it. And if they do accept it, there's another thing that you can bring up, but you have to be really careful about. And that's bring up the concept of the executive reputation. If they're going to make a decision that says, that you need to violate a federal regulation, a state law, PCI, something like that, if they're the CISO and want to move to CEO, or if they're making decisions that they have to sign off on, say they're at the CEO level and they have to comply with various regulations, sign papers and things like that, saying that they are compliant, all of a sudden their reputation can be shot if they aren't doing this. So mentioning the regulatory, mentioning the executive reputation can go a long way to getting what you need and getting past the business need trumping security. But even with all that, sometimes you're going to have to just say, okay, in this instance, yes, we're going to accept this risk. Much as it's painful to do, sometimes it has to be done. It's not something any of us like to do, but send the email saying you recommend against it and move on to fight another battle. Because if you continue to fight a battle that you know that you've lost, you're just going to lose more ears within your organization because you're going to be seen as combative and argumentative. It's really, you have to pick your battles. So, how do we make the users care? The infrastructure challenges aren't getting any easier. We're seeing more and more of a move to cloud, I'm going to have to drink later, and various other technologies that take some of our infrastructure out of our hands. We're dealing with users bringing in their own equipment. Specifically the tablet devices, the phones, all of this stuff coming into the organization. And it's really difficult to deal with it, especially if you've got an adversarial relationship with your user base. And so how do we make them care? And we're not allowed to use power tools, sticks, clue-by-fours, anything like that. So it comes down in a lot of cases to who you know. This quote is all over the place. You can find references to various individuals. Metallica's done a song based on it, but it holds true. You have to be able to know people within your organization in order to communicate with them. And you have to be able to communicate with them in order to get them on your side. So you have to be a little bit more outgoing and talk to some of the people a little bit. So what are we looking for out of all of this? I don't know about you guys, but from my perspective, from my team's perspective, and most of the people that I know, we're looking for a chance to make things better. Make the network safer, protect the data that we've got out there. We're looking for an opportunity to make sure that there aren't major breaches, that people aren't getting huge identity theft cases brought again. Sorry, that was poorly phrased. We're trying to protect the users, we're trying to protect the data, we're trying to protect our company and make sure that everybody's still got a job at the end of the day. And it is frustrating as hell to deal with a user who doesn't understand that and is trying desperately to do something that will cripple the organization because they want to put an any rule at the top of the firewall or something like that, just so that they can watch Netflix on their lunch break. It is incredibly frustrating. So, now we're going to talk a little bit about how to channel that frustration, how to do something about it. I've gone into a lot of what the problem is. Hopefully, these next several slides will give you an idea of how to go back to your organization and really be able to do something, improve the relations, and get the support that you need in order to do your job. We can't hide from our users. In my last position, I was working in a healthcare institution, and the security team offices were behind 3 locked doors. In order to get through the first, you had to be part of the IT department. In order to get through the second, you had to be a senior member of the IT department. In order to get through the third, you had to be a member of the security team or our direct management, which is great for being able to have your own little echo chamber where you can bounce ideas back and forth and rant about how the users aren't doing stuff the right way, how they're not implementing things correctly. But it's not so good for actually getting out there and talking to the users and getting their perspective and being able to get them to your side. The problem really boils down to, because we tend to look at the users as us versus them, a few bad apples tend to spoil our opinion of the entire group. I mean, I've been at places where there were one or two really massive agitators against the security team in different departments, and because of that, we really didn't like dealing with anyone in those departments, even though several of the people in those departments were actually on our side and at least started out agitating in our favor until we alienated them. One of the other big things is we can't be the traffic cops for the organization. No one likes a traffic cop. I was able to successfully, at 2 different places, get our web proxy, just the management of what sites are blocked by the organization, moved to HR. Because in my opinion, that's where it belongs. It doesn't belong with the security team. If we're talking about sites that are malware providers, phishing sites, whatever, yeah, that we should have some say over. But for the most part, the decision whether or not to block xkcd.com should not be our decision. It should be an HR decision. Because if it's information security's decision, then anytime somebody tries to go to a website and it gets blocked, then the people that get cursed are us. So if it's possible to move that off of your plate and onto somebody else, do it. I saw a massive improvement in overall user acceptance of security once it became someone else's problem. But it's not all bleak. We can use some of our best skills to our advantage here. Most computer geeks in general, and information security geeks in specific, are really fantastic problem solvers. And in some cases, it strikes me as odd that some people haven't done more problem solving on the whole user acceptance thing before. I've done some looking around. I've found a couple of things here and there on it, but nothing quite like what I'm presenting. And also several dozen of us, well, not several dozen, most of us are probably also pretty good social engineers. I mean, the fact that you're here indicates that there's at least some interest in the topic. So why don't we use those skills to try to get at the users? We have to talk to them. I know it's hard. I'm an introvert at heart. It took me a good week of hiding in my house, not talking to anyone before I was prepared to come to Blackhat and DEF CON and go out and be social with people. And when I'm done, I'm probably going to go hide in my house for another week or so in order to recover. There are a lot of us that are introverted, but we have to be able to talk to the users. We've got to be able to go out and talk to them. Not necessarily about what our most favorite interests are, but we need to try to find where our interests coincide. And it starts, unfortunately, with making small talk. And much as I hate to say it, attending office functions. I hate going to the floor birthday parties with a burning, loathing passion. I have hated it for years. But just going and having a slice of cake with the people from accounting or with the other people in IT that you don't normally talk to, it begins to humanize you, and it becomes a lot less us versus them, which is what I see as the biggest problem. And if you can start doing less us versus them, you can begin to talk to them about what you want to do. And users will understand limitations that they can accept. And the biggest point is, I know it's hard, and I know that a lot of us are introverted, but for a lot of the more gregarious positions, like the salespeople, the marketing people, anybody who's got to be out with people on a regular basis, being introverted, not taking that 30 seconds to stop and say hi when you walk past somebody in the hall and maybe to ask about their kid, that says that you're being arrogant and mean. It's a weird behavioral tick. Once I learned that from a friend of mine who was a psych major, so I started trying it. I would stop, I would ask questions, I would say, how was your weekend, how was your day? And all of a sudden I was getting people talking to me, asking me questions, asking whether or not they should click this attachment that they just got. And just that simple interaction made us seem much more approachable within the information security team. And it helped a great deal to humanize us in the eyes of the users. So, we've got to talk to them. We've got to go out, we've got to socialize, we've got to do that stuff. Here's the attack, here's how we're going to do it. So, with our social engineering hats on, we've got to start paying attention to what our users are doing. Where do they go? Who do they talk to? Look at it as a social engineering engagement. If you were coming at it as a physical pen test, how would you cozy up to these people? Do they all go en masse to the break room every hour and a half? Do they stand around and talk about their latest fishing trip, golfing trip, whatever football game was over the weekend, whatever? Find out what they're doing and see if you can figure out the best way to infiltrate each group. And frequently that becomes a matter of finding out what the overall interest is of the group. And that's going to vary from group to group. There was a group of salespeople at one of the positions that I was in that were heavily into deep sea fishing. And I'm not hugely into it. I like to eat fish, but I don't necessarily like to go get it. And I would go talk to them. I'd ask them about it, just say, hey, I don't know if I'm ever going to do it, but I'm curious about how this works. And once you get somebody started talking about their particular hobby, it really tends to open a lot of doors. Figure out how to speak to these people the way they speak to each other. And if that's kind of the fakey bro type way, well, when in Rome. But you don't have to do it all the time, just with that group. And you can get the information that you need, and as you've done that, you can begin to plant the information that you want to get distributed. Now, here's one that I've had a lot of trouble with. At my current position, I work from home most of the time, and my preferred dress is shorts or jeans and a t-shirt, and I almost never wear shoes. But when I go to speak to a client, and even at previous positions where I've been physically in the office, I started to notice that how you dress actually matters when you're trying to prove a point to a group. At the hospital that I worked at, I was on a project where I was having to work with two different groups of our salespeople in the organization who were going out into the community getting donations and stuff like that. And I started to notice that they would pay attention to whoever had the most expensive logo on their shirt. And so I decided to try an experiment. I had to go in and present a particular tool that we were going to put in, and it was broken up into two groups, one for the one group, one for the other. The first group, I went in my normal work clothes, which were jeans and a t-shirt. And the salespeople were looking out the window, playing with their phones, basically doing everything in their power to ignore what I had to say. And so I talked to my wife, who is one of the annoying fashionable people. And she said, great, we're going to the mall. Ah, crap. And so we went, and I got a shirt that had a little alligator on it. And the next day I went to the meeting with the other team, and it was weird. Because I was there, I was wearing khakis, I had the alligator, a belt, all that mess. And they listened. They put their phones down and listened to what I had to say. They asked questions that indicated that they were actually paying attention. And so I decided to take it a step further, and I started when I was going to executive meetings. I started, first wearing my interview suit. I still only have one suit. But it really is. Suits listen to other suits. If you've ever been to a neighborhood that you're only allowed to wear certain colors if you walk down the block, It's weirdly similar in suit land. If you're wearing a suit, they listen to you a lot better than if you're not wearing a suit. It's very strange. I don't completely understand it, but when you're doing this kind of a social engineering engagement, you have to pay attention to what they're wearing. If you were going to go in and try to masquerade as a copier repair person to go in and plug something into the network, or better yet enter the super secret code into the multifunction copier to give you admin rights to it, you wouldn't dress in jeans and a t-shirt. You'd dress in whatever the repair people tended to wear. So it's basically the same thing. We're just twisting it to go against your own organization. All right. So once again, we have to look at how they work. Not just what they do, but we have to look at how they work. Are these the type of people that when they write an email, immediately run over to the person that they wrote to tell them that, hey, I just sent you this email, and then discuss what they wrote in the email? If they do that, then begin to expect it from that group when they email you. And in some cases, they're going to expect it if you email them. Find out where they talk and what they talk about. And this is really an instance of, do they all go out to lunch together? Do they all go to a particular bar after work? I mean, I know InfoSec geeks hate going to a bar, but sometimes just trying to go to the bar with them, or being at the bar and go, oh, hey, I didn't know you guys came here. That can begin to build some bridges and begin to get you in with that group so that you can begin to hear what they're talking about. And this last point is use their names in conversation. I know it seems cheesy and it seems like a basic sales trick, but that's because it is. It's a basic sales trick. Most of the people out there, if you read some of these sales manuals, do respond to their names being used. If you use their names in conversation, it indicates that you're paying attention, that you're listening to what they have to say, and that they are personally important to you. It's all subconscious, but it helps. All right, so now what? We've done our reconnaissance. We've figured out what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and what we want to accomplish. We need to use what we've learned. We have to use our protective camouflage to kind of blend in with the group that we want to influence. We have to communicate with them as they communicate with each other. And if you've done it right, then sometime during this process, you're not the security dudette, the IT geek. You've become human to the users, and hopefully they've become at least a little bit more human to you. And so at that point, you can start talking to them. I mean, one of the big ones that I found was just talking to users in general. You can begin to find out an idea of what's important to them, what they need to do. And when you're finding that out, you can find out the buttons to push to get the security that you need to implement implemented. And you can start telling them how security can make things better for them. So to give you an example, this is at the hospital I was working at. They wanted to start out, the clinicians wanted to come in and get faster access to medical records at the patient bedside. And they didn't talk to really anybody in IT when they started this process. And as was typical at the time, security was the last to know. So non-technical management wants to use a card-based system. They've decided that prox cards are the best because everybody's already carrying around a prox card. It's part of the badge. Everyone has to wear a prox card because you need it to get into the building, you need to get onto the patient care unit, you need it to get into some of the offices, all of that. So the users are already familiar with the technology, so there's no real education that needs to be done. They don't have to carry anything extra, and it's easy. The vendor also says that this is HIPAA compliant, and that there is no need to enter a PIN every time the user badges in. Yeah, that's still kind of a sore point with me. So they send the project to the security team. And the first thing that we go after is the policy argument, because HIPAA says that you have to authenticate the user getting access to the data. The argument came back was that the guidance that comes with HIPAA lists several different things that count as authentication, and one of them is that the user carries a token or a key. Not that it has to have a PIN associated with it or anything like that. So they were within the guidance but not within the law, and we tried that argument. And it failed miserably because they had decided that this was what the clinicians wanted. The clinicians were going to get their way. No matter what, this was what we were doing. It was being implemented in the insecure fashion. So we then went and tried to do the more like the CAT card that the government uses that has the chip and pin type setup. We tried that and says, all right, it'll be simple. They'll just put the card in the slot and type in a pin. You already have to buy card readers for everybody. Oh, buddy, why not just replace keyboards with the ones that have the card slot in them? They didn't like that. And at that point, my manager threw his hands up in the air. So did his manager. And I'd been working on the ideas that were leading up to this talk, and I suggested, well, why don't we go out and we talk to them? Why don't we look at it as a social engineering engagement and go see what we can find out? And so I and two of my compatriots started going out really under the guise of finding out a better workflow. We were not IT security, we were just IT. And we were looking at workflow improvements for the clinicians. So we started shadowing them, finding out what they did, and we were talking to them. And one of the major things that we found out, and the reason that they wanted to go to this ProxCard login, was because in order to get access to the systems, they were having to walk into the room where they might be able to spend 5 minutes with a patient in the hospital. They were having to walk into the room, turn to the side, enter their credentials again, fix the typo, and wait for things to come up and bring up information and go through all the process to get the information that they had had access to at the nurse's station or in their office 5 minutes before. And so of the 5 minutes they had with the patient, 2 minutes was spent getting the right information up on the screen. The next, they were saying the new system allows them, really to shave that time off, because we were also talking about implementing it with single sign-on and adding in some of the virtual desktops so it would be persistent from place to place. And so they would really just be able to tap a badge and get access to the patient data, go in and start talking to the patients right off the bat. And they said that the system was secure because it meets HIPAA and because clinicians always have their badges. They have to have their badges with them at all times. It's a requirement in the hospital, and they can't get from place to place without them, so of course they'll have their badges. Now, because we had ingratiated ourselves to them at that point, we were able to start talking to them, and we started talking to some of the key agitators for this, and the ones who were agitating against any kind of a login, any kind of a PIN, and just wanted the Prox badge. And we explained that someone with commodity hardware and a backpack could wander around in the cafeteria or the common areas or the Starbucks downstairs and clone badges just by walking by. These were RFID-enabled Prox badges. And if you weren't entering a PIN every time you used it, then all somebody had to do was watch for a clinician to go to lunch, and they could go in and get full access to all the data. And we explained that there are several big problems with that. One, any HIPAA violations are the fault of the provider. They're the fault of the clinician, which kind of shocked them. Then we explained that we had just had a case 6 months prior where there was a doctor who was billing 36 hours a day. And the way he was doing this was he had given his logon credentials to several interns and told them to just use that. And so the billing system was catching his name every time they logged in. And I explained, it's like, no, 99% of the doctors, especially the one that I was talking to, would not ever consider handing their badge to somebody else to go log in. But there are some out there that would. And the badge cloning problem would do the same thing. And then the biggest one, I actually found out through a friend of mine, is that doctors have these DEA IDs that are what allow them to write prescriptions. And with the single sign-on and access to the charts and everything like that, one badge tap gives you access to write prescriptions for morphine, codeine, all of the really fun ones. And once we brought up those arguments with the cloned badges, most of them turned right around and were like, we need to put some security on this right now. It was shocking, the transformation that happened. So we came back and we said, all right, the most secure would be a chip and pin type thing, where you take the card, you put it in a slot, you type your pin and go. They didn't like that. They felt it was too cumbersome and that they would lose cards, et cetera, et cetera. And then we said, all right, fine. How about we go with the prox card like we were talking about, but you have to use a relatively complicated pin every time you log in. And they tested it out. We talked about requirements, everything like that. And the prox card system got implemented, and they have to enter a fairly complicated pin, passphrase, passcode, whatever, every time they log in. And we were able to turn this from a massive loss for organizational security to a massive win just by going out and talking to them and using some of the techniques that I've talked about as we've gone on. It was truly shocking how quickly it turned around. I mean, it was amazing. So while you're doing all this, you got to listen to the users. I mean, if we hadn't listened to the users, we wouldn't have found out any of the arguments that we finally used to get this, to get the prox card system implemented securely. Once you've learned how they work and you've listened to them, and it's much easier to find out what they need. If you listen to how security gets in the way, you can either explain why that's necessary, or you can go in and give ideas for improving the workflow and making things work a little bit better than they do now. If they want to get to some site that your organizational policy doesn't allow, especially if you've managed to get everybody pushed off to all the web proxy stuff pushed off to HR, you empathize. I mean, just say, look, I want to get to random site as well. I would love to look at my pictures of lolcats. But we can't. It's organizational policy. I can't do anything more about it than you can. We can complain to HR together and build your security with the users in mind. Help them to do their job a bit more securely, and you're going to start getting more involved. They're going to start calling you in at the beginning of projects instead of once they've already picked a vendor and placed the order. Adapt your security plans. I know a lot of us don't like to do that, but sometimes you have to bend a little to gain a lot. And if you can, it's like, I would have loved to implement the chip and pin system in my example earlier. It would have been a lot more secure, but going with the prox card with the strong pin bent just enough that they allowed it to go forward. Listen to what your users have to say, especially when they're saying you're doing something wrong. And one of the big lessons that I've learned and I've had to teach other people about is inconsistent policies mean that they're going to violate your policy. One policy that doesn't make sense to a user means they're going to stop paying attention to all of them. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but they do. One of the big ones that I've seen is an organization I was at allowed web mail traffic on the standard network and over the wireless, but didn't allow any access for POP, IMAP, SMTP, anything like that. And then they started deploying iPads and tablet devices, and the users began to complain because it didn't make sense to them that they could go to Gmail on their handy-dandy smart whatever and see all their email, but they couldn't click their mail app and get the same information. And after arguing it out, because from a technical perspective, it makes perfect sense why you would allow people to go via SSL to Gmail, but not allow them to go using POP, IMAP, even the secured ports. It makes perfect sense to me. But from a user perspective, it made no sense. So we looked at it, we reviewed it, and we decided that realistically, that block wasn't helping us that much. So we changed. And if you can loosen restrictions in your organization that don't need to be there, you'll be seen as acting in the user's favor, and it will help your organization overall. All right, so lessons learned. You have to focus on the audience. You have to know what to say to who. You have to understand their strengths and their limitations, and one of the big ones is shorten your emails. I'm sure almost everybody here knows the abbreviation TLDR. That applies to most users too. Most of them won't read past the second sentence of an email. It's a tenet of journalism classes. I learned years ago that when you're writing the lead into an article, you want to get the overall summary of what you're writing in the first couple of sentences, or at least the first paragraph, because most people aren't going to read much further than that. So if you can shorten your emails and really target what you're saying to the particular audience, you're going to see some benefit from that. Remember, in terms of targeting things, different groups in management are going to want to see different things. Your C-level wants to know what the cost benefit is. You want to give them short points that are easily digestible, because whether or not in reality they're incredibly busy, most C-level people consider themselves to be incredibly busy, and if whatever you're telling them is taking longer than about 2 minutes, they're thinking about something else, and you've lost them. So keep your points short, easily digestible, clear and concise statements, and mention any regulatory requirements up front. Non-technical managers really only care about how this is going to impact them, how this is going to impact their employees, what the impact to the business, and to a degree they care about the regulatory requirement, and that's something to bring up if they start complaining about the impact. Technical management. I'm sure some of you in here are technical managers, and most of the technical managers that I know want to know details. They want to know what the problem is, how do we solve it, what's another option to solve it, because usually other management wants at least 2 options, and what is the likelihood that this thing you're bringing to them is going to cause a breach? How likely is it to be exploited? All right, so basically this whole talk boils down to communicating with your users solves problems. If you understand your users and adapt to allow them to do what they perceive as what they need to do, you're going to get more traction within the organization. You need to explain the limitations and why there are policies that they don't like. If you can change the policy they don't like, do it. If you can't, explain why it can't be changed, and explain it in a way that that they'll understand. It's not going to work with everyone, but from my own experience, it works with most people. And it has helped a huge amount in getting more organizational acceptance in the companies I've worked with, and now with the clients that I deal with. All right, any questions? I'm happy to answer them. All right, there's a mic at the back. I think we have one question. Thank you. All right.
So I don't have a question as much as a comment, because I'm in probably a different position than most folks in the room. As a network engineer, I end up implementing the policy. So what happens is the security professionals sit in their ivory tower and they lean over the side and they take a dump, and it lands on my head, and I have to turn around and go tell the users why things don't work a certain way. if you are keeping people from getting their job done, then you need to give them a solution that lets them get their job done. Because if you tell developers, like the classic example and a big security problem right now is, what do you do with mobile developers? They have these insecure devices that need to get on wireless.
Right.
They need to be able to access a dev server running on their desktop, and the security people are running around freaking out about it. Meanwhile, if you tell them, no, you can't do that, they're going to go down to Fry's, they're going to buy an access point, they're going to plug it in at their desk, and all of a sudden you have unmanaged wireless everywhere, because at the end of the day, they may empathize with the security policy, but they need to get their job done. So
there has to be a way for them to do it.
Instead of saying no, what happens is you have to give a solution.
Right.
And that's what I see not happening all the time. They just say no instead of saying, I have to write this application, this is my device, this is my development environment.
Instead of saying no, say why.
Well, even when you're saying why, though, if saying why keeps them from getting the job done.
Well, but if you do have a dialogue going with your users, you can actually begin to have that conversation. When they come to you and say, hey, we need to do this, you can say, okay, why do you need to do that? What is this going to solve? What will this allow you to do? And then you come back and you do it in a way that is more secure. If your policies are such that it's taking 3 months to implement a new wireless access point to allow a user to do what they need to do, then, I mean, that goes back to the adapt to your policies, change your plans. Because if you're not doing things in such a way that the users feel that they're being supported by security and by IT in general, then yeah, you're going to lose them.
Well, and the other problem is in your environment with medical people, that's one thing. If you work with really smart developers, they'll just, I mean, buying an access point is trivial. You can put all the blocks they want in place.
Oh, well, when I'm talking about users, I'm actually talking about the IT people too. Because most of the time and in most of the environments I've been in, the information security team is kept separate from the network team, from the systems team, from the developers.
And so once you've lost them, the users are lost. They're not going to listen to you anymore, and all they'll do is figure out ways to get around you. And that's the risk.
That's why I'm approaching it as a social engineering attack. Any other questions? All right. I'm happy to respond to questions via email, via Twitter, and thank you.